Agitorium nostrum in nomine Domini. We continue the study of this great saint, Archbishop Saint Cyprian, martyr. So we saw this very, very important point actually that we're coming to. In the year 249, Decius came to the throne of the Roman Emperor, Emperor Decius. 249, so this is another wave of severe persecutions. The blow fell so suddenly that large masses of lax and compromising Catholics were unable to sustain it. Thousands, to be sure, stood firm and joined their bishops and priests in enduring the cruelest tortures and the most excruciating deaths, rather than to deny Christ. So in the martyrology in the morning, you hear often, Saint so-and-so, martyred on the rack and burned alive under the Emperor Decius, right? Other thousands of Catholics fled to the mountains and to the deserts to live in huts and caves until the storm blew over, especially in Egypt, where the persecution of Decius brought about results, as we shall see, very different from his expectations. But the saddest chapter was written by those thousands of Catholics who either worship the idols or pretended to do so to save their lives. For every martyr and refugee, there was probably one of these miserable apostates. This created a tremendous new problem for the Church. In all parts of the empire, she had to consider what to do about the sacrificati, which is those who actually burned incense. So the first group of apostates, sacrificati. What do you do with Catholics who, after they've burnt incense to the gods to save their skin, the persecution is over? What do you do with them now? They apostatized. So Saint Cyprian is going to be dealing with this. What do we do with these Catholics who basically kicked our Lord in the teeth, walked out of the church to save their skin? And then there was also the Turificati, those who had burned incense. Turificati, Thurificati, thurifer, you get the word thurifer, burning incense, right? Thurible. So sacrificati might have been more with blood and animals. That might be the difference here. Turificati, those who had burned incense. And then those who had bribed venal imperial officers to give them certificates showing that they had conformed, even when they had not. These were called the libellatici. Libellatici. The libellatici. That is, those who said, look, I'm Catholic, I'm not going to burn incense. Can you just write me a certificate that I did burn incense? So what do you do with these three? In all cases, they deny the faith. And they were held by good Catholics to all be equally guilty. Those who actually burnt or sprinkled blood or killed an animal, those who burned incense, and those who got the certificate saying, I did sacrifice to the gods of Rome, even though they did not, in fact. When the edict of Decius, the emperor, reached Carthage, North Africa, at the beginning of 250, the year 250, it hits at Carthage. Many fled to the mountains or the desert, but many others hastened to sacrifice. Catholics hastened to sacrifice, burn incense, or to buy certificates. Their shepherd was probably proscribed by name Cecilius Cyprian, bishop of the Christians. And he was condemned to death as an enemy of the gods and of the emperor. Again, the very accusation that had been made against Christ himself. The mobs of riotous idolaters filled the streets, crying out for the blood of the victim. "Cyprian to the lions! Cyprian to the lions!" they shouted. Then many of them in mockery changed his name from Cyprianos to Koprianos, which means dung. So they mocked him in his name from Cyprianos to Koprianos, which means manure. "Throw the filthy one to the lions," the mob shrieked. "Death to the dungy one." Death to the cow manure. Death to the piece of manure. St. Cyprian, as usual, had recourse to what? Anybody?
Prayer.
Yes. Should he wait for his arrest by the imperial troops? Or should he go forth boldly and offer himself up? According to his own account, he had a vision in which the Lord told him to depart from the city and hide himself in the desert until the storm spent itself. If he was killed now, there would be no one to reorganize and reform the Catholics of Carthage, and the faith might vanish from Africa. And had not Jesus himself fled from his persecutors more than once, because his time had not yet come? St. Cyprian arose from his knees and stole away. So he went out to the deserts. Although it was generally believed at Rome and by some of his own flock that he had yielded to cowardice, it must be said that subsequent events tended to support his version. From his hiding place, he began at once with great vigor to carry out the commands that he had received in his vision. Appointing a committee to rule the church in his absence, he exhorted them to lead godly lives, to visit the Christians in prison, and to receive the Holy Eucharist daily. He gave careful instructions to his priests regarding the lapsed brethren who had sacrificed to idols. These were the sacrificati and the turificati, or had pretended they had done so to save their lives, the libellatici. Those were to be readmitted to communion only after they had done penance and given evidence of true sorrow. So there was a place for them, but they had to do public penance for a public apostasy. He severely censured one named Gaius and other priests who were too lenient in this respect, quoting against them the words of St. Paul, "Whoever shall eat or drink unworthily shall be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord." And he deprived them of their revenues. So let's see, we have a footnote. These depended upon the gifts of the faithful. The total was divided each month into 4 parts. 1 for the bishop, 1 for the clergy, 1 for the poor, and the 4th for the upkeep of the churches. That's what the revenues were. Where are we here? When St. Cyprian returned to Carthage from his desert retreat after 14 months. So how long is that?
A year and 2 months.
He found the church comparatively free from persecution, but beset by the far more deadly threat of internal dissension. His old enemies, Novatus and Felicissimus, had taken advantage of his absence to organize a schism against him. This Novatus was to be a thorn in his flesh indeed for years to come. He was a bad priest, shifty, unscrupulous, dishonest, and quarrelsome. He had the reputation of having robbed widows and orphans and of having let his old father starve and be buried by the charity of strangers. The bishops and clergy in general had no liking or respect for this Novatus, Father Novatus. In fact, nothing but the persecution of Decius has saved him from a trial for heresy, and perhaps from excommunication. To such a man and his associates, the deacon Felicissimus and 5 priests, the return of Archbishop Cyprian to Carthage promised nothing good. Seeking a pretext to denounce him, they found it in his severity towards the lapsed, for whom he had decreed a year of penance before reconciliation, and assembling in a mountain village, they sent out a general invitation to apostates to join them there and be restored to communion without any tiresome formalities. So you follow? The lapsi, that is those who did all these is called the lapsi. That is the lapsed, those who lapsed by sacrificing, burning incense, or the certificate. What do you do with them? St. Cyprian had them a whole year of penance. They could not go to communion. They could not participate in the Mass of the Faithful until they've done a year of penance. That sounds fair enough for apostasy. But these rats, Novatus, Father Novatus and his gang of priests, and Felicissimus the deacon, they said, everybody, you can come with us and you don't have to go through all the strict requirements of Archbishop Cyprian. Just come to us, we'll absolve you, and you can start going back to Mass and communion. No problem. Hence, St. Cyprian found waiting for him a schism of no small proportions. He boldly met the challenge by holding a council at which Father Novatus and the other ringleaders were declared excommunicate. The heresiarch then fled to Rome. So St. Cyprian did what a good archbishop would do. He excommunicated this rebel priest who was going directly against his orders as the archbishop on a matter of faith and morals. He arrived in Rome at a time most favorable for a man with his talent for intrigue and discord. For the see of Peter had been vacant since the murder in January the year 250 of Saint Fabian. Saint Fabian. And what martyr was killed with him? Anybody know?
Oh.
January 20th, I think, is the feast of Saint Fabian, Pope, and who?
Was it his deacon?
No?
No.
You're thinking of St. Lawrence and Pope St. Sixtus. It was martyred with St. Fabian, the patron of athletes.
St. Sebastian?
Yes. St. Sebastian and St. Fabian. This Pope, St. Fabian, chosen while a layman because a dove settled on him in the conclave of 236 AD. He was one of the first victims of the cruel edict of Emperor Decius. When at last the Christians ventured to gather in the emperor's absence to elect the next pope, they had agreed upon Cornelius, a holy Roman priest who had carried on the administration of the church during the interim period. One of his tasks had been the restoration to communion of those who had lapsed during the persecution. In this he had been more lenient thus far than the Archbishop of Carthage. So St. Cornelius was more, all right, I don't know, it doesn't say how long, but maybe he gave half a year or even a month, I don't know. And just as St. Cyprian had been denounced by Father Novatus for over-severity, Cornelius was accused of criminal negligence by another troublemaker, one Father Novatian. This man had been a Stoic philosopher who, during a dangerous illness, had accepted baptism of a somewhat doubtful validity. During the persecution, he had been conspicuously absent from Christian gatherings. Now he was veiling his own frailty with a show of great severity towards others, making himself, that's this Father Novatus, head of a sect known as the Novatians or the Cathari, the pure, the Puritans. He found 3 bishops who were willing for a consideration to go to Rome and consecrate him bishop. Thus he became the first of the notorious line of anti-popes who were to divide, confuse, and plague the church from time to time. So this was the first so-called of the Tuke lines, we could maybe even say. Now it was to this man's door, and not to that of Cornelius, that some obscure spiritual affinity led the footsteps of Father Novatus when he arrived from Africa, full of indignation against St. Cyprian. And because the pendulum of heresy swings easily from one extreme to another, it was not long before he was lustily echoing Novatian's thunder against the very apostates for whom he had been demanding mercy in Carthage. The Pope's reply was to assemble a synod of 60 bishops, who excommunicated the heresiarch and confirmed the canons providing for the reconciliation of penitent apostates after suitable penances. St. Cyprian, writing from Africa, heartily congratulated Cornelius. He had now managed to present his case to many of the 46 priests of Rome, and had the consolation of knowing that they accepted his explanation of his flight. He in turn helped them in their conflict with Novatian, Father Novatian, by denouncing him as a deserter from the church, a foe of all tenderness, a very murderer of penance, a teacher of pride, a corrupter of the truth, and a destroyer of charity, quote unquote. And to oppose the influence of Father Novatus, Novatian and Novatus, 2 different characters, both in Italy and in Africa, he wrote the burning sentences of the most famous of his treatises, De Unitate Ecclesia. Which means what? De Unitate Ecclesia.
Concerning the United Church.
So concerning the unity, the church unity, yeah. He wrote, St. Cyprian, now he's quoting directly from St. Cyprian. This is taken, of course, from Mean Petrology. God is one, he wrote, and Christ is one. And his church is one, and the faith is one. And the people are joined into a substantial unity of body by the cement of concord. Close quote. This unity of his mystical body was clearly intended by Christ when he said, Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give to thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Furthermore, he had said with emphasis, He that is not with me is against me, and he who gathereth not with me scattereth. Heretics, said St. Cyprian, were even worse than the lapsi, for they sinned more than once and hurt others beside themselves. There were such as St. John the Apostle spoke of sternly and sadly when he wrote in 1 John chapter 2, verse 19, They went forth from us, but they did not belong to us. For if they had belonged to us, they would have remained with us. God permitted their defection so that the light of the faith of true Christians would shine more brightly. But the heretic did not hold the true faith and would not share in the rewards of Christ, since he had forsaken the church of Christ. St. Cyprian said, He is an alien, a castaway, an enemy. He can no longer have God for his father, who has not the church for his mother. That's the famous words of St. Cyprian. One cannot have God for his father who does not have the church for his mother. So Archbishop Lefebvre could have said the same. No one can have God as father who does not have the church, the true Catholic Church, for his mother, not the conciliar church, but the Catholic Church of tradition. If anyone could escape who was outside the ark of Noah, wrote St. Cyprian, then he also will escape who shall be outside the pale of the church. Christians ought to rejoice when bad men left the fold, quote, lest with their fierce and poisonous contagion they prey upon the doves and sheep of Christ. And they should shun and avoid all such and flee from them, for they were perverts and in sin. St. Paul told us to shun all brethren who walk disorderly, and not after the tradition they had received from us, the apostles. In apostolic times he reminded his flock, the multitude of those that believed were of one heart and of one soul, and prayed with one mind, while they sold their houses and gave the proceeds to the poor. Now they did not give even a tenth of their patrimony. The Lord says, give, we buy and increase our store, writes St. Cyprian. Thus has the vigor of faith dwindled away among us. Thus has the strength of believers grown weak. Would Christ find any believers when he came again? He concluded with a stirring appeal to all to have their loins girt and their lamps burning in their hands, ready to open to him when he came, when Christ comes again. St. Cyprian was an industrious, if not a voluminous writer, and solid rather than brilliant. As the practice of the faith gradually purified his mind and heart, the bombastic and pedantic phraseology of his epistle to Donatus, a treatise on the vanity of the world written soon after his conversion, gave way to a grave and noble eloquence, much praised in spite of certain African colloquialisms, by which keen critics, as Lactantius and St. Jerome. So in his writings, he would have certain phrases that were typical of the region of North Africa. So such as in America, we say, knock it off, or what else do we say? These colloquialisms, these local phrases.
I'll be a monkey's uncle.
I'll be a monkey's uncle, yes. Hold the phone. Right? Or in Philadelphia, it's, yo, Adrian. Right? Most of his works were homilies directed at some immediate moral end. The moving discourse, and here's a list of his writings, on the Lord's Prayer, those on jealousy and envy, on the vanity of idols, on the advantage of patience, of alms and good works, on the lapsed, on the lapsy. These are all in mean patrology in the ante-Nicene Fathers. This last, on the lapsy, written immediately after his return from exile to Carthage, insisted upon penance before reconciliation and declared that priests who gave Holy Communion to apostates without first testing their faith were doing no service to those who, quote, coming back from the altar of the devil, their hands yet reeking with the blood of the sacrifices there offered, would approach the highest mysteries. So he rebuked priests who were too soft with the lapsy. They have to show penance and contrition of heart. His 3 books of testimonies against the Jews, again found in Mean Patrology, M-I-G-N-E. His 3 books of testimonies against the Jews were in no sense an attack on Jews, but rather followed the line of St. Justin in exhorting the wanderers to remove the real cause of the so-called Jewish problem by acknowledging Christ. The chosen people had fallen under the heavy hand of God, wrote St. Cyprian, because they had departed from him, had served idols, and had stoned the prophets to death. Nor would they ever understand the Scriptures until they believed in the Lord Jesus. Christians had taken their place in the grace and favor of God, and Gentiles rather than Jews would attain the kingdom of heaven. Yet the Jews could have the pardon of their sins if only they would wash away the blood of the slain Christ in the baptism of Christ. These are his very words. Wash away the blood of the slain Christ in the baptism of Christ. There is much more than that, however, in the testimonies against the Jews. The work is a compendium of Christian doctrine, including eschatology. What's eschatology, anybody? Eschatology. It's all the teachings regarding the end of the world. All the teachings regarding the end of time.
How do you spell that?
Eschatology, E-S-C-H-A-T-O-L-O-G-Y. Eschatology. And the etymology of the word, meaning the meaning of the word. Eschatology comes from the ancient Greek words eskatos, meaning last, and logia, meaning the study of. So it's the study of the last things. In St. Thomas Aquinas, it's called De Novissimus. De Novissimus, the theology of the study concerning the last things. So, there is much more than that, however, in the testimonies against the Jews. The work is a compendium of Christian doctrine, including eschatology. Like most of the early Christians, St. Cyprian expected the early advent of the man of sin, who would turn the whole earth into a desert. So he expected the Antichrist would come soon. He assailed the lust for money repeatedly, and in the famous treatise on the dress of virgins, he ridiculed the plea of rich Christian women that they must live up to the means God had given them. Quote, he says, "Let them know first of all that she is rich who is rich in God. You say that you are wealthy and rich. Let the poor feel that you are wealthy. Let the needy feel that you are rich. Lend your estate to God. Give food to Christ." As for the elaborate cosmetics of the day, so here he's talking about all the makeup on the ladies. Quote, "God neither made the sheep scarlet or purple, nor taught the juices of herbs and shellfish to dye and color wool, nor arrayed necklaces with stones set in gold, and with pearls distributed in a woven series or numerous cluster by which you would hide the neck he made. Has God willed that holes be made in ears? Everything that comes into being is God's work. Everything that is changed is the devil's work. With evil presage of the future, you begin to make a beginning of yourself already with flame-colored hair. Are you not afraid, I entreat you, being such as you are, that when the day of resurrection comes, your Maker may not recognize you again and turn you away and say, this is not my work, nor is this my image? That's funny. It's all come back, hasn't it? All flame-colored hair. You have polluted your skin with false medicament. You have changed your hair with an adulterous color. Your face is violently taken possession of by a lie. Your figure is corrupted, your countenance another's. You cannot see God, since your eyes are not those which God made, but those which the devil has spoiled. With all the makeup caked on their eyes. You have followed him. You have imitated the red and painted eyes of the serpent. Since you are adorned in the fashion of your enemy, with him also you shall burn by and by. And so that's...
Wow, we picked the fight even with the women.
I'm sure he had a whole string of women out front of his of his house, of his hut. What you say about us? By such words as these, with his priests carried it to all parts of his diocese, the good bishop effected a tremendous reformation in manners, morals, and the practice of the faith. Nor was the task finished a day too soon, for though Decius was dead now, the devil was still abroad, and a vision warned St. Cyprian that an even worse calamity was again about to fall upon the heads of the Christians. A storm is coming, he wrote Pope Cornelius, and a furious enemy will soon declare himself against us. The struggle will not be like the recent one, but more sharp and unbearable. This we have frequently had revealed to us from above, he wrote. So convinced was he of the truth of his revelations that he now hastened to give a plenary indulgence to all the remaining lapsed who wished sincerely to be reconciled to the Church, so that they might be fortified by the sacred body and blood of Christ for the trial soon to come. For how shall they be able to die for Christ if we deny them the blood of Christ? He asked. So he saw a new, fresh persecution around the corner, so he gave an early pardon to the lapsi, so they could go to confession, communion, be strengthened for the next wave of persecution. And because they're sorry for the first time denying Christ, many of them will die for him now. How shall we fit them for drinking the chalice of martyrdom, he wrote, if we do not first admit them to the chalice of the Lord? So you see, that's the heart of a good priest, of a good bishop. He sees danger coming and he's looking after their souls to strengthen them for the coming storm, even though he was firm with them when they lapsed, a year of penance. So you see from the saints how they handle people. They're very gentle and good with people, but firm when it comes to the honor of God. What was this storm? It was the Great Plague of 250 to 262. The Great Plague. 250 to 262. That set the stage for the drama he feared. The Great Plague of 250 to 262. First showing itself in Ethiopia, in Africa, during the reign of Decius, this mysterious disease had spread to the east, had destroyed the armies of Valerian in Persia, and finally, after laying low thousands in all parts of the empire, was making its appearance in its most deadly form in Carthage. It produced a feeling of weakness, laryngitis and sore throat, heat of the intestines, convulsions of the stomach, redness of the eyes, vomitings, impairment of hearing and sight, and in a vast number of cases, death within a few hours or days. Whole families were wiped out. Streets were left deserted, save for rotting corpses grinning vacuously in the doorways as pagan survivors fled hysterically from wives, husbands, parents, children, or cast the dying out of the doors as if they could shut death out with them. Houses were looted, rotting carcasses were left unburied on the streets. Nothing remained but despair and the stench of death. The plague tested the work of St. Cyprian and found it good. Calm, confident, resourceful, St. Cyprian assembled his people at the first intimation of panic and reminded them that as Christians purchased with the blood of Christ, they should display more courage and self-control than those who did not know him. Let them therefore stay at home, care for relatives and friends, for strangers too. Yes, and especially for enemies, for such was our Lord's teaching. So isn't that beautiful? Stay with those suffering. Take care of them. If you catch it, well, blessed be God. You die with greater merit. But don't imitate the pagans who abandon everybody to save their skin. And if so doing they died of the pestilence, what of it? Why should Christians fear death, he said. And this he asked in his treatise on the mortality. Should they not rather welcome death, since it was the door to eternal happiness in God's presence? He writes, to this delightful society of the blessed and to Christ who is the head of it, let us hasten, my brethren, on the wings of desire and of holy love. Heartened by his words and example, most of his priests stood firm and risked their lives daily in utter self-forgetfulness, while the rich laity gave alms to the sick and the poor contributed their labor. Thus the Catholic Church became the only relief organization in Carthage, nursing the sick, feeding the homeless, burying the dead, comforting the survivors. Christians alone in all that mad world kept their sanity. Their pagan neighbors were impressed, and many were converted. Meanwhile, Gallus, the murderer of Decius, the emperor, and his son, had now raised himself to the imperial purple. So now it's Emperor Gallus, Gallus. And as he wondered how he could restore public confidence throughout the devastated empire, the new Caesar bethought him of the evil example of Nero. It was always convenient to blame the followers of Christ. It was always convenient to blame the followers of Christ. The plague had come upon the people, he declared, because the gods were angry. And the gods were angry because the Christians, the Catholic people, had refused to worship them. Death to the Christians! Death to the Christians! The old cry resounded once more through the streets of one pagan city after another. The Christians to the lions! Christiani ad leones! Thus began a persecution even more bloody and more thorough than that of Emperor Decius. Heretical Christians, as St. Cyprian noted, were not molested. The devil, he said, had nothing to fear from them. They were his already. So isn't that interesting? The heretics, they didn't bother arresting them. But Catholics everywhere were arrested, scourged, beaten, racked, roasted alive, beheaded with swords, run through with spears, pulled to pieces, bit by bit, limb from limb, with red-hot pincers. They were burned at the stake, mangled by wild beasts in the arena, tormented as slowly and painfully as possible by new instruments devised for that purpose. Gallus was not content, as Decius had been, with the blood of priests and bishops. He was resolved to leave no professing Catholics alive. One of his first victims was the good Pope Saint Cornelius. So here is another height of persecution, which will continue next time. Adjutorium nostrum in omnia.